The argument from irreducible complexity is essentially a modern spin on William Paley's original watchmaker argument, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. The term was initially coined and popularized by Michael Behe in 1996 in his book Darwin's Black Box. Since the time of its introduction, this argument has gained massive popularity in many Christian circles, but, like many other arguments for the existence of God, has several flaws which are unfortunately overlooked by many in the religious community. In this video, I wish to show that even if we accept that a system is irreducibly complex, this does not prove that it was designed or that there is a God, and that this argument is further weakened by the addition of relevant scientific information. The argument from irreducible complexity in its most basic form, as put forth by Michael Behe, states that 1. Certain biomechanical systems are sufficiently complex such that the removal of any part of the system would render the entire system incapable of performing any beneficial function to the organism. 2. Because the entire system must be present for it to provide any benefit, under a naturalistic worldview, the entire system would have to come into existence simultaneously or be completely repurposed from another pre-existing system. Since mathematically it is practically impossible for this to occur, evolution is unable to explain certain complex biomechanical systems. Any irreducibly complex system must have a designer, as it cannot be explained naturalistically. This designer must be sufficiently powerful and knowledgeable to produce such a system. The only such being is God. Conclusion: therefore, a God exists. One thing I would like to point out is that proponents of irreducible complexity often refer to irreducibly complex systems by two different definitions. The first, and the one that Behe generally uses, is a system that is arranged such that the removal of any part would cause the system to cease functioning, and therefore could not have evolved while performing the same function. The second definition, and the one that is generally not used by Behe, is a system that is arranged such that the removal of any part would cause the system to cease functioning, and therefore could not have evolved by any naturalistic means. This is a very crucial difference. Importantly, the first definition is not necessarily a challenge to Darwinian evolution, as such a system still could have evolved. A good example of this is put forth by Kenneth Miller. Miller explains how our auditory apparatus is irreducibly complex, and that the removal of either the malleus, incus, or stapes would cause us to be unable to hear, but that they all evolved from more basal forms of the mammalian jawbone. This is a perfect example of a system that meets Behe's definition of irreducible complexity, but nevertheless was still evolved. In Behe's own words, he states an irreducibly complex system is, quote, a single system composed of several well-matched, interacting parts that contribute to the basic function of the system, wherein the removal of any one of these parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. This matches the first definition of irreducibly complexity, and therefore is not a direct challenge to a Darwinian mechanism for the evolution of any biomechanical system. This argument is strictly based off probability. This will be extremely important later on. However, many proponents of irreducible complexity use a second definition and state that any irreducibly complex system could not have evolved by any means. For the sake of argument, I will originally grant this definition as true, as it is a lot stronger than the one that Behe himself generally proposes. The biggest flaw with this argument, even when granting the second definition of irreducible complexity, is that it essentially states, I don't know, therefore I know. This is evident in this fourth premise, which states any irreducibly complex system must be designed because it cannot be explained naturalistically. If you do not know something, in this case, how a complex biomechanical system came to exist, that's where the conversation stops. Period. There is no, I don't know, so God did it. This is a common example of the God of the gaps fallacy, wherein someone takes any gap in common scientific understanding and posits that a God is responsible for whatever fills that gap. Dressing up such a poor argument in new clothes does not grant it any more credibility. Before Darwin, God was apparently responsible for creating all animals, each according to their kind. Now, he's apparently only responsible for creating certain complex biomechanical systems which science does not fully know how came to be. This demonstrates the ever-receding area where this argument can pretend to hold sway. Furthermore, even if Dr. Behe could disprove evolution on every point beyond any reasonable doubt, this would still not provide evidence for a God or creator, much less the specific God that Dr. Behe believes in. This is something that is often overlooked and should not be understated. The lack of evidence for one position does not provide positive evidence that a separate position is correct. The fact that we know the moon is not made of cheese does not support that the moon is made of flashlights to allow it to give off light. Likewise, the fact that we know the Earth is not flat does not support the fact that the Earth is a cylinder. Both of these are preposterous. Likewise, the lack of evidence for evolution does not and cannot support that a God exists, just as the validity of evolution does not disprove the existence of a God. Additionally, Dr. Behe, to the best of my knowledge, has never acknowledged evidence for evolutionary mechanisms to explain systems that he previously claimed were irreducibly complex and inexplainable by evolution. This includes blood clotting mechanisms, chloroquine resistance in malaria, and the mammalian eye. This demonstrates a track record of claiming that certain systems are irreducibly complex and prove that a God designed them, but then ignoring relevant scientific research when it becomes available. While it's possible that this is not the case, it does seem odd that a PhD biochemist would not review relevant scientific research before propagating a claim. This, once again, sheds light on the fact that this argument is based off an argument from ignorance and must therefore continuously regress to systems that are not fully explained by science, where it can say that a God designed them. Furthermore, almost any so-called irreducibly complex system can perform the same beneficial function for an organism while missing one or more of its component parts, thus failing to be an example of irreducible complexity by Behe's own standards. Additionally, there are many systems that would meet Behe's criteria for being irreducibly complex, but nevertheless have proven evolutionary mechanisms as to how they came about. If a system meets either one of these criteria, then it cannot be used by this argument, as premise 1 does not work, and therefore the rest of the argument is immaterial. This applies equally to the poster child of irreducible complexity, the bacterial flagella. For example, non-flagellar type 3 secretion systems, which inject effectors into eukaryotic cells, contain the C ring, MS ring, and the majority of the basic export apparatus responsible for the rotation of the flagella in flagellar bacteria. Gram-positive bacteria lack both the P and L rings of the bacterial flagella, and the rod, hook, and filament complexes have all been shown to have a reasonable evolutionary pathway from just 2 proteins. Therefore, anatomically modern bacterial flagella do not meet Behe's own criteria for an irreducibly complex system, as they can function perfectly well without many of their parts, and large parts of the bacterial flagella have a reasonable evolutionary pathway. Yet another critical flaw with this argument is that even if we accept that a system is irreducibly complex, it is inherently more likely that it evolved than that that system was designed, as we have a wealth of evidence supporting evolutionary mechanisms for such systems, but no evidence supporting that such systems have ever been designed. If you must assume that a God exists for it to make more sense that a system was designed, then you are assuming your conclusion and your argument is useless. Finally, is it even possible to test this claim to design, whereas claims about genetics, biochemistry, or evolution can all be tested under scrutiny to see if they are true? Claims about design cannot be. To get around this, Behe generally makes common inferences between obviously designed objects and biomechanical systems. His favorite one of these is that of the mousetrap. Behe explains that a mousetrap has many parts and requires all of them in order to function, and that the mousetrap is designed. He then goes on to explain how certain biomechanical systems are also extremely complex and require all of their parts in order to function properly. He then draws a false equivalence between the two and states that therefore these complex biomechanical systems must also be designed. This analogy does not hold. All mousetraps we have ever observed have been made by humans. This is not true of complex biomechanical systems, wherein we either have no evidence that they were designed or compelling evidence of an evolutionary mechanism that explains their existence. This attempt to prove design is not only unscientific, but also dishonest, and therefore cannot help prove this argument. All of this aside, what would be the use of science if we were to throw up our hands every time we didn't know something and claim God did it? If we had adopted this methodology in the past, we would still think the world was flat. We would still believe in a firmament that covered the earth and held up the great waters in the sky and opened up to allow the rain to fall down. We would still believe that earthquakes, volcanoes, and other natural disasters were caused by supernatural beings, and that illness was caused by demons. I don't know about you, but I would much rather live in a world where science is governed by methodological naturalism rather than Behe supernatural BS. Fortunately, we are in little danger of the second becoming common practice. Thank you for watching. I've been Michael Cunningham, or Nuanced Skeptic. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video and found it interesting. It helps me greatly and will let me know if I should continue to make videos like this in the future. Again, thank you for the view, and I'll see you in the next one.